Hey everybody, Jam Creates here, doing another video. Had a fun little idea I wanted to talk about today. Just going to do a quick one here. I wanted to talk about, and it's going to sound kind of strange, I guess. I don't know, whatever. I wanted to talk about kids shows in a way, I guess. I was talking to my daughter, and I had this weird, revelation, I guess you could call it. We were talking about television and stuff, and she asked me what my favorite shows were when I was a kid. And, I said, well, I guess it depends on, how old I was. Obviously I had different favorites at different ages. And she said, well, what about when you were, my age? And she's 12 years old. And it was funny because I said to her, I'm like, I think probably I would say my favorite shows when I was a kid would be, if you're talking about cartoons, it's really obvious. I loved stuff like Transformers and G.I. Joe and He-Man. That stuff was always my favorite. Those were my, Voltron. I loved Voltron back in the day. The Lions, not so much the vehicles. But don't get me wrong, I would watch the vehicles too. That was my thing back then. That was my jam when it came to cartoons, was things like Voltron and G.I. Joe and Transformers, and then other stuff like some oddball things that I would find on the cable channels and stuff, like Bionic 6 and Spiral Zone and, oh man, Galaxy Rangers. I loved Galaxy Rangers when I was a kid. I thought that had the coolest animation. Because it just didn't look like anything else that was on TV at the time. And looking back on it now, I understand why, because it was Japanese animated, and most of the stuff that was on, even if it was animated in Japan or in, somewhere in the Pacific, which a lot of it was, it just had a different character design to it. It had more of a Japanese character design to the characters, and it just was so cool looking to me. It's also the first show that I can recall mixing in CG into a show, even the tiniest bit. It was really just, they only used it, I think in 1 or 2 episodes. And it was only just something they were viewing on a computer screen. So that was, I loved that. I liked Saber Rider and the Star Sheriffs. And I watched a lot of cartoons when I was a kid. And then, of course, as I started going, Ninja Turtles became a huge thing for me. I loved me some Ninja Turtles, man. And I still love the first live-action movie. That thing was great. And you cannot tell me otherwise. I don't care what you say. That movie was awesome. I still quote that movie. Wise man say, forgiveness is divine, but never pay full price for late pizza. I seriously, no, I love that movie. I used to listen to the soundtrack all the time when I was mowing the lawn. That's how you know I was a little bit older, because I was cutting the grass and listening to the soundtrack. But then, as I was thinking about it, and I was like, yeah, and I loved shows like The A-Team and Knight Rider, and what was the other one I mentioned to her? It was A-Team and Knight Rider, and I forget what the other one was I mentioned to her, but there was a few specific ones I mentioned. And I remember thinking to myself, these shows that used to be, they were, family-friendly shows. At least, back in the 80s, they were considered family-friendly shows like the A-Team and Knight Rider and stuff. And yet, if you watch those shows, there's tons of gunfire and fights, and, they're pretty much action-adventure shows is what they are. But they're kid-friendly, honestly, because people don't really die. People died in Knight Rider. There would be, a murder plot or something, a murder mystery to be investigated from time to time and things of that nature. The A-Team, not too many people died in the A-Team. You could probably count on one hand the amount of people who died on that show. But cars would go flipping over, and they would bounce 87 times, and then the dudes would come staggering out. Much like in G.I. Joe, every plane that blew up had to have an accompanying parachute with it, because no one ever blew up in their plane. They all ejected just in time. Whatever, it was fun. Who cares? It was just fun. But I think about it now, and literally, you cannot watch a show now. There are no kids shows with guns. They just literally don't use guns in kids shows anymore. it's funny because I remember even thinking, like, when I was older, when things like Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh became like these giant hits, I remember seeing, clips where like guys had their hands in a position where clearly they were holding a gun in their hand, but they had just taken the gun out of the American version of the cartoon, which is just kind of funny because then it just makes it look silly. Because they didn't even replace them with anything. They just had their hands there and their finger in an invisible trigger, and it was just like, well, no one stands with their hand in that position unless they're holding a gun. Like, that's just freaking weird. So it was just kind of stupid, but it makes you laugh. But it's funny because I think about like these live action shows, like I said, things like Airwolf and Knight Rider and the A-Team and whatever. I'm trying to think of some other ones from back then, and I'm blanking a little bit, but stuff like MacGyver, and that was the whole hook with MacGyver, was he didn't use guns. And that was a cool thing. Like, that was like it was a Batman-esque thing about the character. He had that whole I don't use guns thing. And I never had a problem with that. Like, I never thought MacGyver was a wuss for not using a gun. That was just his stand, and he was a hero, and that was what he did. And that was perfectly acceptable, and that was fine to me. It made logical sense, and it was cool. And he used to make, like, bombs out of, like, a bottle cap, a couple of paper clips, and, like a box of Arm & Hammer or something, and like, whatever, and that's what he did, and he, it was cool. It was kind of like the professor from Gilligan's Island, who would make, like, anything out of, like, coconuts and some palm trees. But, like, that was, I'm just thinking about, like, the kids' shows of today and the kids' shows of back when I was, and listen, I'm an old man. I joke about it all the time. I always joke about being old. I'm 43 years old. I don't hide how old I am. I don't care. It means nothing to me. It is what it is. I'm an adult. I'm 43 years old, and I don't care. I'm not one of these people who's like, oh, you can't know how old I am. Who really gives a rip? Doesn't matter. But it's just kind of funny. Like, it just means I have more life experience. That's all. And I can judge these things on a broader scale. But it was just funny to talk to my daughter about, like, and I know what her favorite shows were. And I had all types of different shows that I really enjoyed. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I loved a good sitcom back in the day. When I was a kid, of course I did. But it's just kind of funny, like, there's nothing, like, I don't know. I mean, video games have replaced the A-Team and replaced that stuff because kids now are playing, now they're playing Fortnite. That's all they're playing. Minecraft and Fortnite is, like, the only thing kids want to talk about or play nowadays. And then you get the other ones who play stuff like Call of Duty and stuff like that, even though they're probably too young to be playing it. Don't get me started on a whole thing about that. I am I've mentioned before, I've been a huge video game fan my whole life, and I also worked as, I don't know if I ever mentioned this, but I worked as a brand rep for PlayStation for a while, and I have always taken it upon myself when parents are asking if I'm in the video game aisle, and parents are like, oh, should I buy this for little Jimmy? And, he's only 8 years old, but he really wants to play the new Call of Duty. And, like, yeah, that's not really appropriate for an 8-year-old. These games, they have ratings on them, And then I have to explain the rating system to parents and stuff. And whatever, I've done that. It's fine. And especially when I was a brand rep, I did that all the time because that was part of my job, was to get people to buy things and feel good about the things they bought for their family. Not feel like, oh my God, what did I buy for little Jimmy? He's beating up a hooker and running her over with a car. That's just whatever. But, like, it's just funny to think about. There's really no point to this video, honestly. Like, I don't have a grand point to make about it. Just the fact that it's kind of funny how very different things were back then and how different they are now. It's just kind of a weird thing, like, to think about how, and I never really thought about it, but, like, I watched lots of shows growing up where people were shooting up places left and right, and I did not become a violent murderer. Far from it. I am actually one of the, I don't want to say one of the most gentle, people. That just sounds lame to call yourself something like that, but I've always been a caring and kind person. I'm not going to toot my own horn and talk about all the nice things I've done or anything like that, or talk about charitable stuff, because that's just silly. I don't feel like it's right to brag about that stuff. You don't do it for the reward or the bragging rights. You just do it to do it because it's the right thing to do. Anyway, I am where I was going. So that was basically it. I just thought it was interesting. Let me know what you think about like the differences. If you really have ever thought about the differences, if you're old like me, the differences between the things that you watched as a kid and the things that your kids are watching now. And just does it make a difference to you? Do you think it's better or worse? Or do you think it just is what it is and it's not really a big deal either way? To be perfectly honest, you tell me what you want. It's all valid to me because I'm not really sure. I haven't really given it that much thought. It was just something that popped in my head after a conversation I had with my daughter. So that's it. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Hit the subscribe if you're not already subscribed. Please do. I would love to have you. I want to add more and more and more to this site. And the more people we have, the better things can get. Jingle that bell for notifications so you will never miss a video. This has been a packed full week of videos. I'm going to probably post on Twitter just like a recap. So, if you missed any videos this week, you can just follow me on Twitter at @jam_creates, and I'll link them all there so you know what to get. So that's it. I will talk to you guys soon, and peace out.